What's the deal? You tapped in with G Light. Today, we got Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr., whose original name was actually Michael King Jr., was born January 15th, 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia. Crazy, right? You never knew that Martin Luther King's name was actually Michael. Inspired by the Protestant reformer Martin Luther, at the age of 5, Michael Luther King got his name changed to Martin Luther King to become more inspirational to the people.
Original Martin Luther was a German monk who lived from 1483 to 1546. He was considered a major figure in Protestant Reformation, which is basically a religious revolution in Europe. Luther's big deal was the challenge of the Catholic Church and the authorities, especially when it came to selling indulgence. Basically, the idea that you could pay for a church to have your sins forgiven. He wrote his famous 95 Theses, which were arguments against the church's practices. This started the movement and eventually led to the creation of the Protestant religion.
As a kid, he wasn't interested in ministry, although his dad was a well-known preacher. He was a super smart kid and was able to skip grades and get into college really young. In 1944, at the age of 15, he was admitted into Morehouse College, where he graduated 4 years later in 1948 at the age of 19. At first, he wanted to be a doctor or a lawyer. It was this time at Morehouse, while he was surrounded by other social advocates, where he learned to take on social issues. These are the people who mentored and guided him towards ministry. After Morehouse, King studied at Crozier's Theological Seminary and Boston University. This is where he would earn his doctorate and meet his wife, Coretta Scott, in 1953. Inspired by Gandhi, King's early movement was nonviolent.
With that philosophy, it shaped the way he led the Montgomery bus boycott and other major movements.
As the movement moved on, there were other leaders that opposed King. Some black leaders felt like his emphasis on nonviolence was slowing the whole movement down and didn't address the immediate needs of the black community. One of the most famous critics of Martin Luther King was Malcolm X, who advocated for more aggressive tactics and self-defense. There were other black leaders that felt that King was too focused on integration and not enough on black nationalism, believing the focus should be creating strong, independent black communities rather than be fully assimilated into white society. August 28, 1963, Dr. Martin Luther King gave one of his most famous speeches of all time, the I Have a Dream speech. This was during the March to Washington for Freedom and Jobs. Huge event with over 250,000 people in attendance. The speech itself called for racial equality and non-discrimination. He had a dream for a better future where people weren't judged off of their color or race, but for their character. The late 60s were a major change for King. His focus expanded from racial inequality to economic justice and the end of poverty. He spoke out against the Vietnam War, which made a lot of moderate white supporters angry at him. King felt the growing sense of urgency, famously saying he felt like he was leading his people into a burning house, describing the danger and the immediate need for action. He even expressed fear that he wouldn't live to see the end of the civil rights movement. On April 4th, 1968, in Memphis, Tennessee, Martin Luther King made an appearance to support the striking sanitation workers. While standing on the balcony of a second-floor room in the Lorraine Motel, Martin Luther King was gunned down. The shot supposedly came from a nearby building. King was rushed to St. Joseph's Hospital, where he was pronounced dead an hour later. The assassination sent shockwaves through the nation. Riots began to erupt in all the major cities as people tried to grieve the loss of this leader. 2 months later, the assassin James Earl Ray was arrested and charged with the assassination of Martin Luther King. Initially, James Earl Ray pled guilty to the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but he later changed his story. Ray claimed that he was part of a larger conspiracy and that he didn't actually fire the shot that killed King. He said a man named Raoul was the one who actually pulled the trigger.
You heard the news on the radio? Is that the way you heard it? So you were driving, you left that gas station at 2nd and Linden, what, about 6 or?
I don't have any way of knowing. I think it's around that time, but I don't even know if it's Linden. I know the approximate area it is. And I've seen the map on the Enquirer.
And you were going back to pick up this man that you say is Raoul?
No, I just waiting the car back.
So you heard all this confusion, turned and flipped on the radio. They said Dr. King's been shot. Did you think you were set up at that point?
No, I was headed toward New Orleans when I had the radio on. I used to keep the radio on. I think I didn't have too strong feelings about the shooting.
When you met Raoul, you didn't know any other name for him. Apparently. That's the name that he said was his, and that's all you ever knew.
Yeah,
about
I
him.
just know.
And you met him where?
Canada.
Up in Canada. And you just met in a saloon, or?
It was a saloon in the waterfront area of Montreal.
You never became good friends then?
No, I wasn't a good friend. Just business. These were all aliases, I assume.
You don't think Raoul was a real name at all then? Huh?
No, I've got some Freedom of Information papers in there saying there's a Raul Santiago or something in New Orleans, supposed to be him, but I don't have the FBI. That's material from the FBI files, but I don't have nothing to substantiate that.
So you think their mind was made up when they got you?
Well, it had to be made up. They couldn't. Well, I don't know if there's any penalty for extraditing someone fraudulently or not, but I think I can see their legal point where they've got to stick with their story.
Although most investigators concluded that Ray acted alone, the conspiracy is still widely disputed. As of lately, President Trump recently signed a bill to release the information on the assassination of Martin Luther King and President Kennedy. With that being said, you tapped in with G Light TV. Now you know what I know. Peace.